My name is Sophia Miller. I'm 27 years old and I live in New York City. I grew up believing that parents were supposed to protect you even when they didn't understand you. But one night, the people who raised me made a decision that pushed me out of their home and straight into a life they never thought I could survive, let alone win. What would you do if your own parents looked you in the eyes and said, "You need to leave"? No warning, no explanation, no second chances. Would you fall apart, or would you quietly promise yourself that one day they'd regret doubting you? I walked out with a small bag, a shattered heart, and one burning question: what if this rejection was actually redirection? Stay with me till the end, because the way my story unfolded, even I didn't see it coming. I still remember the way the house felt that evening, not loud, not chaotic. Just heavy, like the walls already knew what was about to happen. It started as a normal conversation. That's the scary part. Nothing dramatic, no screaming, no slammed doors. Just my parents sitting across from me at the dining table, exchanging those quiet looks parents think their children don't notice. The kind of look that says, "We've already decided." I was 27, working long hours, trying to build something of my own. I wasn't perfect, but I wasn't a failure either. Still, every achievement felt invisible to them. Every mistake felt magnified. And that night, every sentence they spoke sounded less like concern and more like judgment. My father cleared his throat. My mother folded her hands, and suddenly I felt like I was on trial in my own home. They talked about disappointment, about expectations, about how I wasn't where I should be by now. Each word landed heavier than the last. I tried to explain. I talked about my goals, my struggles, the pressure I felt every single day. But the more I spoke, the clearer it became. They weren't listening to understand. They were listening to respond. Then came the sentence that split my life into before and after. My mother said calmly, almost gently, "Maybe it's time you figure things out on your own, somewhere else." At first, I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because my mind refused to accept what my ears had just heard. I looked at my father, waiting for him to step in, to say something, anything, but he didn't. He just nodded. That nod hurt more than the words. I asked, "Are you serious?" Silence. That was my answer. In that moment, I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was a problem they wanted removed. A weight they didn't want to carry. And suddenly, every childhood memory, birthdays, holidays, bedtime stories, crashed into me all at once, asking a painful question. Was I only loved when I was easy? I stood up slowly, my hands shaking, not from anger, from disbelief. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. I wanted to fall to my knees and beg them to reconsider, but something inside me froze. Pride, shock, self-respect, I still don't know. I walked to my room. Packing felt unreal. Like I was watching someone else's life fall apart from a distance. I picked up clothes without thinking. Left behind things that mattered, because my hands couldn't stop shaking long enough to choose. Every item I placed in that bag felt like a goodbye to the girl I used to be, the one who believed family meant unconditional love. As I zipped the bag, I waited for footsteps. Waited for a knock, waited for someone to say, "Stop, we didn't mean it, come back." No one came. When I walked back into the living room, bag in hand, the TV was on. The news was playing. The world was moving forward like nothing had happened, and that felt crueler than anything else. I stood there for a second, hoping they'd look at me. They didn't, so I walked out. The air outside felt colder than I remembered. The streetlights blurred as tears finally escaped. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know where I'd sleep. I didn't even know how I'd survive the next week. All I knew was that the place I once called home no longer wanted me. I sat on the steps outside for a moment, staring at the door behind me. Part of me hoped it would open, that they'd realize they made a mistake, that love would win over ego. The door stayed closed. That was the moment something inside me changed, not into anger. Not into hatred, but into clarity. If I wasn't good enough for them while I was struggling, then they wouldn't get access to me when I succeeded. I wiped my face. I stood up. And I walked away, not knowing that this painful exit was the beginning of everything they said I could never become. That night didn't just kick me out of a house. It pushed me into a version of myself that no one could control, dismiss, or break again. And the truth is, they thought they were ending my story. They had no idea. They were writing my origin story. When the door shut behind me, it wasn't just a physical door closing. It felt like my entire life had been locked away, like the world itself had decided I was no longer part of it. I walked without direction. My mind was racing, but my body felt numb. Every step I took felt heavier than the last, because I wasn't just carrying a bag of clothes, I was carrying a new reality. A reality where I had no place to belong. I tried calling friends, hoping someone would answer. But when the phone rang, my heart did too, like each ring was a hope rising up only to fall again. No answer, not even a text back. I didn't blame them. Who would want to get involved in a family fight? Who would want to be the person who takes sides? I realized something in that moment. When your life breaks, people don't always come running. Sometimes they just keep walking. I remember sitting on a bench in the middle of the city just watching strangers pass by. Everyone seemed so busy, so sure, so protected. They had families, homes, routines. They had somewhere to go after work. They had someone waiting for them, and I had nothing. The loneliness didn't hit me all at once. It was a slow, creeping feeling, like cold water seeping into your bones. I was surrounded by people, but I felt more alone than I ever had in my life. At night, I wandered the streets until my feet hurt. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a direction. I only had one thought repeating in my head: how did I end up here? I tried to find a place to sleep, but every option felt impossible. I couldn't stay in hotels. I didn't have money. I couldn't stay with friends. I didn't want to be a burden. I couldn't go back to my parents, not after what they said. So I did what anyone would do when they're desperate. I kept moving. I found a 24-hour cafe and sat there until the early morning. I ordered the cheapest drink I could find and stared at the floor, pretending to read the menu. But I wasn't there for coffee. I was there because it was warm, and it had lights, and it gave me a reason to keep my eyes open. As the hours passed, I started to notice the people around me. A man in a suit staring at his laptop. A teenager laughing with friends. A woman reading a book, completely lost in her own world. And I realized something: everyone had a story, and none of them were perfect. So why did I feel like mine was the worst? I stayed there until the morning rush ended. Then I walked to a nearby public library and sat in the corner, just to feel like I belonged somewhere. I opened my laptop, but I couldn't focus. My mind kept replaying the argument, my parents' faces, the coldness in their eyes. I kept asking myself, was I really that bad? The truth is I was. But the pain of being rejected by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally made me question everything about myself. I stayed in that library until the sun started to set again. Then I walked to the subway station because I knew if I didn't keep moving, I would collapse. And that's when the real survival began. I started searching for temporary jobs, anything that would pay enough for a cheap room. I applied for part-time shifts at stores, restaurants, and even cleaning jobs. Every rejection felt like another door closing in my face, but I kept going. Because I knew something that my parents didn't. I wasn't going to let their decision define me. The first job I got was at a small cafe. I remember the manager looking at my resume like it was a joke. But I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just nodded and said, "I can start today." That night, when I finally had a small paycheck in my hand, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: control. For the first time since I was kicked out, I wasn't helpless. I was earning, I was surviving, and I was doing it alone. But loneliness still followed me like a shadow. I would come home to my small rented room, eat the cheapest meal I could find, and then sit in silence. No one asked me how my day was. No one cared if I was tired. No one noticed the bruises on my heart. I tried to make friends. I tried to connect. But it was hard. Because when you've been betrayed by the people closest to you, you start to build walls around your heart. I didn't trust easily anymore. And that's when I learned the most important lesson of survival. Sometimes the person who has to save you is yourself. So I started to build a routine. Wake up early, work hard, save money, repeat. I stopped thinking about the past. I stopped asking why. I started focusing on what I could control. And slowly, the loneliness began to change. It didn't disappear. It didn't go away completely. But it stopped being a weakness. It became a fuel. Every night I spent alone reminded me of something, that I didn't need anyone's permission to live. That I didn't need validation from people who couldn't see my worth. I began to understand that survival isn't just about food or shelter. It's about mental strength. It's about refusing to break even when your heart is cracked in 1,000 pieces. And while I was surviving, I was also preparing, because I knew one day I would prove them wrong. Not out of revenge, but out of self-respect. After a few months of survival, something started to change inside me, not because I was suddenly happy, not because my life was easy, but because the pain of being rejected by my family began to turn into something else, a hunger. A hunger to prove that I wasn't worthless. A hunger to prove that I could build something from nothing. A hunger to show the world and myself that I wasn't a mistake. So I decided to step into the corporate world. And let me tell you, it was brutal. Because corporate doesn't care about your story. It doesn't care about your pain. It doesn't care about how hard you fought just to get here. Corporate only cares about results. I started with a job at a small company just to get my foot in the door. The salary was low, the hours were long, and the respect almost non-existent. I walked into the office on my first day and I felt invisible. No one welcomed me. No one introduced themselves. No one cared to know who I was. I sat at my desk, feeling like a ghost. Then came the real challenge, proving myself. The first week was the hardest. I made mistakes. I was slow. I didn't know the systems. I didn't know the rules. I didn't know the politics. And the worst part was, people watched me. They watched me like they were waiting for me to fail. I remember one manager in particular, a man who looked at me like I was a joke. He would assign me tasks with a smile that said, "You'll never finish this." He would talk over me in meetings. He would ignore my ideas. He acted like I wasn't even there. And every time he did that, something inside me burned. Not with anger, with determination. Because I realized something, they weren't disrespecting me because I was weak. They were disrespecting me because they saw that I had potential. They saw that I might rise, so I started working harder. I stayed late. I arrived early. I asked questions. I learned everything I could. I studied other employees. I watched how they moved, how they spoke, how they made decisions. I started to understand the game. And the more I learned, the more I realized corporate was not a battlefield, it was a chessboard, and I was done being a pawn. I began to take control. I started delivering work faster than expected. I started taking responsibility for projects that others avoided. I started solving problems before anyone even noticed them. The same manager who used to laugh at me began to stop laughing. He started watching me. And that was the moment I knew something was changing. Because in corporate, attention is a weapon. When you are ignored, you stay invisible. When you're noticed, you become a target. And I was becoming a target. But I didn't care. Because I was no longer working to survive. I was working to win. Months passed. I got promoted. Then another promotion. And with each step up the ladder, I felt something shift inside me, not just my salary, but my confidence. I started to realize that success wasn't just about money. Success was about proving to myself that I could be more than the story my family wrote for me. But growth never comes without pain. The higher I climbed, the more pressure I faced. The more expectations I carried, the more people doubted me, and the more I doubted myself. There were nights when I went home and cried in the shower. There were days when I felt like I couldn't breathe. There were moments when I wondered if I was going to break. But then I remembered the night my parents kicked me out. I remembered the cold air. The closed door, the silence, the loneliness. And I realized something, if I survived that I could survive anything. So I kept going. I learned how to speak confidently in meetings. I learned how to present ideas with clarity. I learned how to handle difficult people without losing control. I learned how to use my voice, and as I grew, my presence changed. People started listening. People started respecting me. People started asking for my opinion. Even the manager who once ignored me began to treat me differently. He stopped talking over me. He stopped dismissing my ideas. He even started acknowledging my work publicly. And when he did that, I felt something strange. It wasn't satisfaction. It was power, not the kind that makes you cruel. The kind that makes you realize you are no longer controlled by anyone else's opinion. I wasn't just climbing the ladder. I was rewriting the rules. And I began to understand something that my parents never understood. I didn't need their approval to be successful. I didn't need their love to be strong. I didn't need their acceptance to be valuable. Because the corporate world taught me something important, the only opinion that truly matters is the one you hold about yourself. And the more I proved myself in the office, the more I realized my life was no longer about survival. It was about dominance, not in a cruel way, but in a way that made them realize they lost something valuable. Once I started climbing the corporate ladder, something shifted inside me. It wasn't just the promotions or the salary increases. It was the realization that I had become unstoppable. I used to think success was something you earned with a degree, connections, or luck. But I learned the hard way that success is something you earn with pain, persistence, and refusal to quit. And I was refusing. I remember the first time I saw my name on an email that went to the whole company, a senior executive praising my work, a recognition I never expected. I didn't celebrate, not right away. Because in that moment, I realized what success really meant. It wasn't just validation. It was proof that I could rise above their doubts. Proof that I could become something they didn't think I could. Proof that I could build a life without their support, without their love, without their approval. I started to see the office as a battlefield, and every task was a weapon. I took on projects others avoided. I stayed late when others left. I worked harder when people said I was already doing too much, and the results started to show. I began to get better opportunities, better assignments, better clients. And suddenly, I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. People started talking about me, not behind my back like they used to, not in a way that made me feel small, but in a way that made me feel powerful. The company started trusting me with bigger responsibilities. I was no longer the new girl. I was the one people went to when they needed results. And the more I achieved, the more I realized something. Success doesn't just change your life, it changes how people treat you. The same people who ignored me before began to seek me out. They started asking my opinion in meetings. They started inviting me to important conversations. They started acknowledging my presence. Even the manager who once dismissed me began to act differently. He would now nod when I spoke. He would now make space for my ideas. He would now speak to me like I belonged. And in that moment, I felt something I never thought I'd feel again: respect. But respect didn't come from begging. It came from results. It came from my ability to do what they couldn't do. It came from my determination to win. The promotions kept coming. The salary increases followed. The bonuses, the praise, the opportunities. And with each achievement, I felt my confidence grow stronger. I started dressing better. I started speaking with more authority. I started carrying myself like someone who belonged in the room. Because I did, but the biggest change wasn't external. The biggest change was inside me. I no longer felt like a broken girl who had been kicked out of her home. I felt like a woman who had built her own world, brick by brick. And the most beautiful part, I didn't need them to say sorry. I didn't need them to accept me again. I didn't need their approval to feel complete, because success had become my answer. My answer to their rejection, my answer to their doubt, my answer to their silence. And every time I looked in the mirror, I didn't see a victim. I saw a survivor. I saw a fighter. I saw someone who had turned pain into power. I started to realize that the world is full of people who want to put you in a box, people who want to limit you, people who want to decide your worth, but I had learned how to break the box. I had learned how to use their doubt as fuel, their rejection as motivation, their silence as strength, and that's when I knew success wasn't just a goal, it was a statement. A statement that said, "You tried to break me, but I became stronger, and now I'm proof that you were wrong." Time changes everything, and time changed me. I had been working for years, building a life that I was proud of, not just surviving, but thriving. I had climbed the corporate ladder, earned respect, and built a career that people noticed. And while I was doing that, something else happened too. I started to heal. The loneliness began to fade. The pain started to soften. Not because I forgot what happened, but because I stopped letting it control me. I had become someone who could stand alone, someone who didn't need anyone else's approval to feel complete. And then one day it happened. My phone buzzed, a message from my mother. At first, I didn't believe it. I stared at the screen like it was a mistake, like my eyes were playing tricks on me. The message read, "Can we talk?" My heart started racing. A part of me wanted to respond right away, to rush into their arms and pretend everything was okay. But another part of me remembered the night I was kicked out. The cold air, the closed door, the silence. And I realized something important. If they could do that to me once, what would stop them from doing it again? I didn't respond immediately. I sat there for a long time thinking. I thought about all the nights I cried alone, all the times I wondered if I was a mistake, all the times I felt like my life was falling apart, and then I thought about what I had built. I thought about my promotions, my achievements, my strength. I thought about the woman I had become, and I knew in that moment that I didn't owe them anything, not my forgiveness, not my time. Not my presence. I finally typed a response. "Why now?" That message was simple, but it was powerful because it wasn't begging, it wasn't apologizing, it was asking for a reason. They replied with excuses, with guilt, with regret. They told me they missed me. They said they made a mistake. They said they didn't understand what they were doing at the time. But I didn't feel relief. I felt something else. I felt strength, because I realized the truth. Their apology didn't change what happened. Their words didn't undo the years of pain. And their regret didn't erase the fact that they chose to throw me out when I needed them most. I thought about meeting them. I thought about hearing their voices again. I thought about the possibility of forgiveness. But forgiveness isn't about forgetting. Forgiveness is about letting go. And I had already let go. I didn't respond again. I didn't meet them. I didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me broken again, because I had already won. The success I built wasn't just for me. It was my answer. It was my proof. It was my way of saying, without words, "You tried to erase me, but I wrote my own story." And I didn't need you to survive. I needed you to learn. A few weeks later, I heard through mutual contacts that they were asking about me. They were telling people how sorry they were. They were trying to rebuild their relationship with me through others. But I didn't respond, not because I was cruel, but because I had finally learned the most powerful lesson of all. When someone pushes you out, you don't go back to them. You move forward. And you become the proof that they made the biggest mistake of their life. Because the moment I stopped looking back, I stopped being their daughter. I became my own person. I became my own family. And that's the real revenge. Not revenge through anger, but revenge through success. Revenge through growth. Revenge through peace. If this story hit you hard, do me one favor, smash that like button and subscribe, because I've got more stories like this coming every week. And before you go, I want to know something. If you were in my shoes, would you have walked away or would you have stayed? Comment "walked away" or "stayed" down below. I'm reading every comment, and I want to hear your story. Also, if you want the next part of this story or a similar revenge story, tell me in the comments, and I'll make it. Remember, sometimes the best revenge isn't drama, it's your success.